Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So this is the current progress of the chessboard. We've got the end grain chessboard itself and then the walnut frame with our beautiful looking bridle joints coming together. We only have a little bit of fine tuning to do on this one edge here, then our frame will be fully ready to glue up. So at the end of the last video, I talked about a few different design details that I want to include into the frame here. So this top and bottom piece, I'm going to create a step design with them. So I'm going to add a slight bevel to the ends of these two edge pieces. Then we'll thin down these top and bottom pieces just a little bit so they sit underneath that bevel, and that'll give us that nice step design in the frame. In the last video, I also talked about leaving the joinery proud. I've decided I'm not going to do that because coming out here this morning, I really don't like the way that this looks with the proud joinery. When you're looking at the board from the top down with the proud joinery, it looks very unbalanced and unfinished because you have kind of these pointed edges on both ends, and it just doesn't look as good as I thought it did yesterday, so I'm definitely going to be cutting that off. So then once we have all of those details in, then it's just a matter of cleaning everything up and getting it ready for a glue up. So I've got a decent amount of work to do on this, and I'm really excited to see how it's going to look once we added all these just kind of final details in that, because this is where things start to go from looking really cool like they do right now to looking awesome. Okay, so I've been stuck here for about 20 minutes trying to figure out what I want to do. Because initially what I planned was on each of the corners, I wanted to put in 2 1/4-inch dowels on the diagonal, so we had a little bit of visual detail around our border here. But now that I've added in this step design, we have a little bit of visual detail in the corners already, and I'm afraid that going in and adding 2 dowels in there is just going to be too much. It's going to make the corners look too busy compared to the rest of the frame, which doesn't have any added detail to it. So the other option, we're using just a single 3/8 dowel right in the corner, And the more that I think about it, the more that I like that. But I'm also kind of a fan of the way it looks right now with no dowels there. So on one hand, I really like the idea of adding in the dowels because it's just a small detail that I think is really interesting. But on the other hand, I know that the joint is going to be plenty strong even without the dowels, so I'm kind of hesitant to just jump in and do it. But as I'm standing here thinking about it more, what I might do instead, because initially I was planning to use white oak dowels, if I use a 3/8 walnut dowel, that will give us a little bit of visual detail, but it'll also blend more into the board, which will then take away less visually from the actual aesthetic of the end grain chessboard. It'll just be a very small technical detail in the corners. So there is the board all glued up. It's looking really good. We actually did pretty good. Didn't get a lot of squeeze out in that around, the stepped areas. And even around the bridle joints, I definitely could go through and clean up the glue if I wanted to leave them proud. But like I said before, I really don't like the look of them when they're proud right now. Because from the top down, which is the main way you're going to be seeing a chessboard, it just makes it look unbalanced. So we're going to clean all those up on the table saw really quickly. But before we do that, I got a comment on the last video that I want to talk about really quickly here because I only saw it today, not yesterday when I was actually working on this board. I don't know how to say the person's name, but they brought up a good point about wood movement. Because the interesting thing when it comes to wood movement with an end grain board, if you think about a normal board like this piece of ash here, then you're going to worry about wood movement in two directions. On the width is where you're going to get the main amount of movement. So on this, I think this is about a 5-inch wide piece. You're probably going to get, maybe a 64th of an inch in expansion and contraction over the year. But you're also going to get expansion and contraction on the thickness. Now on a board like this, that's only 3/4 of an inch thick, this obviously the thickness expansion and contraction is going to be completely negligible. It is going to be there, but it's going to be so small that you don't really have to worry about it. Whereas on the width here, you are going to have to consider that little bit of wood movement that's going to come in it if you're going to make this into a floating panel, which is exactly what I've done here, but in a little bit more of a creative way. So with the end grain board specifically, we're going to have to worry about expansion and contraction in all 4 directions. It's going to want to go this way, it's going to want to go that way. And so what makes end grain so good for cutting boards is it keeps a very flat surface because the thickness of it doesn't ever change. It's never going to expand and contract over the thickness of the board, which is why so many people seem to love end grain for cutting boards. But in our case here, we're gonna have to worry about a pretty decent amount of expansion and contraction over the lifetime of this thing. And so just using the Jonathan Katz-Moses wood movement calculator as kind of a jerry-rigged option for dealing with our end grain here, it's not going to be perfectly accurate, but that tells me that over this 14-inch width with the pieces that I have here, the most expansion that I should have to worry about is about 3/64 of an inch. So it really is not that much when you think about it. And in building this, I made sure that I have about a 1/4 inch of movement abilities. And so it doesn't look like I have room for that much expansion and contraction because of a trick that I found online that's actually completely genius in my opinion. And so as you guys saw when we did the glue up on these frame pieces, I have that tongue that then goes into a groove in the side of the board here. So as you guys saw yesterday, before I did the glue up, I hand planed that tongue down quite a bit. And so I made sure that that tongue is basically 1/8 of an inch off of the inside of the board here. And so we did that on both sides. So that allows for about a 1/4 inch of movement. So that allows this whole main core of the board to expand and contract. Then this last 1/2 inch up here that is right up against the frame here should actually not really experience that much wood movement. So it's one of those things that's very weird, and honestly it might not work out in the long run. I'm also doing this whole glue up in September, which is kind of right on the end, so this is kind of So this is pretty close to its maximum expansion point. So over the winter, it's going to contract more and more and more. So I didn't want to leave too big a gap so it's going to become loose in the winter, but I also want to leave just enough room so that, you know, in June, July next year, it can expand slightly because that's when it's going to get its most maximum expansion. So overall, I've done everything I know to do to this board to make sure that it can withstand enough expansion and contraction for this board that we have in here. But again, nothing's ever guaranteed. That's why I'm doing this, is because I want to find out for myself if this is something that would actually be a commercially viable product. So it's not something like I'm going to be releasing this by Christmas time, anything like that. This is going to be a year of watching and waiting and seeing what happens with this board to see if this is something that is a, you know, could be a commercially viable product. Okay, so we now have the board all cleaned up. I've got the small little gaps in it that I add around the joints here. I got them all filled up. We've got everything nicely flattened on the bottom. We added in some nice handles so you can actually pick this thing up off the table because it is decently heavy, and trying to, you know, shimmy it to the edge of the table and pick it up is not super nice. So I just added in these little handles, the same thing I do on like a normal butcher block cutting board. So now the last thing we're gonna do to this is go in and stipple the edges. Now this is something I've been super excited to do because I bought this little Dremel stylo a while back, and then I've got a little Kutzall burr in here. That's a 3/8 burr. And all we're gonna do is just go and make 1,000 little marks along the edge here, and then just create this little detail all the way through. So you can kind of see it on this piece here that I was just testing it on to see if it would work over the sapwood, and you can see exactly what we're going for there, just those little dimples all the way through. So what's gonna be really cool about this is we're gonna have this really clean, refined top side, and then the edges will have this stippled texture to them, so they'll just catch the light a little bit differently, and it'll just take away one of the flat surfaces and make it a little bit more visually interesting. And the reason I like this idea so much is because your edges are fairly narrow anyway, so they're a good place to add in this detail. And so I've used this stippling technique on products before. You guys might have seen it back closer to Christmas of last year. I used this little 3/8 gouge to do all the stippling on the cover of one of those photo books. Now this would work, except we have this end grain in here, which makes me kind of concerned, which is one of the reasons why a while back when I wanted to try and do some more stippling, I bought this Dremel with this Kutzall bit, because for this bit, there's not really a difference between the normal wood and the end grain, so we should be able to get nice even stippling even over the joinery that we have here. Because then once we have the stippling done with the Dremel, we then go over it with a maroon Scotch-Brite pad and really polish up that edge, and then it looks super cool once it's done. So I'm excited to do it. This is gonna take me a long time. I'm gonna be out here for a few hours just touching the Dremel to it. Okay, so the chessboard is now completed. We got the first coat of oil on it. Off camera, I will put another coat of oil on it. The one thing that sucks right now is all I have is just generic paper towel to wipe all the oil off this thing. And if you've ever used paper towel to try and wipe off oil, it just starts disintegrating. It's really annoying. I ran out of shop towel a few days ago, and I've been meaning to order more. That's the big thing when you're using an oil finish like I'm using here with this tried and true. Make sure you keep shop towel around because it works way better for wiping off the excess oil. Anyway, this thing is looking absolutely amazing. With that oil on there, the stippling just looks awesome on the sides. It's not overpowering. And by applying the oil, it brought back that distinct separation between the end grain and the straight grain on the joinery here. So on all of our joints, we have that nice texture running over them, but you can still very clearly and obviously see the joint, which I think is super cool and is exactly what I was hoping would happen with it. So overall, I'm just super happy with how this thing came out. It looks great. It feels great to use. You know, you can pick it up and move it around. Those handles, I'm really glad I added those on because those are going to just make it easier to deal with all the way around. All we have left to do for this project is to make some kind of a storage case or box or something for it, as well as the pieces for it. So the pieces, I don't quite know when I'm going to get around to doing those. Like I said at the very beginning of this project, those seem very intimidating to me for some reason. It's really only pieces like the horse. I don't know if there's an actual name for it, but that one is the most, that's the one that I'm kind of the most worried about. The rest of them are fairly simple, just lathe work, with maybe a little bit of hand carving that in them. But the horse is going to be a full, that's going to be a fully carved piece. So I'm going to have to sit down and figure out some of my carving skills. The other thing I'm going to have to figure out is how to, continually make the same piece over and over. Especially with something like the pawns, I'm going to have to make 16 of them, and I want them to all fairly be consistent in size, style, that kind of stuff. So I'm probably going to end up making like 30 of them. I'm guessing with this project, because it's going to be a case of, figuring out the repetition, figuring out how to just constantly make this stuff over and over and over and over and over again. What I might do for those pieces though is I might order like a super cheap set off of Amazon. That way I actually have something to base measurements and all that kind of stuff off of right now. Because right now I don't own a chess set. I have no idea what size these pieces need to be, mainly the height and all that. I have the basic idea of the diameter I want them to be, but yeah, I have no idea how tall they need to be, all that kind of stuff, and in reference to each other. But that'll all come eventually. Right now, we've just got a beautiful chessboard that is just going to be sitting in my house on display for a little while. In the meantime though, before I make those chess pieces, I am going to, at some point in time, I'm going to make a bunch of like checkerboard pieces, just normal, just little discs, because that's super easy to do. It'll literally just be a couple hours on the lathe, just turning some spindles and then cutting off a bunch of slices. So we'll have a bunch of little end grain checker pieces. So I might do that on camera, I might do that off camera. I don't quite know yet. I might save it for a day where I don't have a whole bunch of time, because that would be a fun little side project to do. But yeah, for now, this thing is just looking, I'm so thrilled with how this looks. To me, it's just one of the coolest pieces I've made in a long time. I just really love everything about this. The end grain is such an interesting look because, you get these wavy lines running through it. The contrast between the end grain of the white oak and the walnut, it's just super interesting how there's just such a difference between them. Then going on to the frame, the dowels in the corner, super good touch. I'm really glad I just went with the single dowel and I made it walnut. There's that very obvious detail there to denote that corner, but it just is so subtle and I love it. Same thing with the step design. Now that we have oil on it, it is a super subtle touch too. And again, I absolutely love it because it also denotes a very obvious front and back of the board, or, player sides of the board. Same thing with the handles on there. Love it. Overall, this is such an awesome project. It came out way better than I was honestly expecting it to. And I'm really excited to eventually make the chess pieces in the box and all that kind of stuff for it, because it's going to be such a cool just piece to have overall. So anyways, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this project. This was an absolutely awesome and enjoyable one for me. I loved working on this. But as always, guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.